and welcome back to my channel. Have some news. I have chopped all my hair off and I've also got a little bit of makeup on today because I just felt like it. Anyway, so I've made a bit of an effort today, so if you don't recognise me, that's why. But anyway, today, as you may already know from the title, we're going to be talking about the pros and the cons of living in Auckland, New Zealand. So for anyone watching this who doesn't know me, I have been living in Auckland now since the beginning of January, which is 4 months. And I feel like I'm now qualified to comment on how it is living here, the pros and the cons, the good and the bad, and the ugly. I've just realised through this whole intro my washing machine's been going and I was going to pause it because it's quite noisy. Give me a second. Let's get cracking. If you're thinking of moving to New Zealand yourself and you want to know exactly how the whole process works from start to finish, go and check out my other video, how to move to New Zealand. I will put a card up here. I will also link it in the description. But for now, if you're just thinking about it and you want to know the pros and cons so you can weigh up your decision, here we go. Number one, shall we start with the pros? Should we do a pro and then a con and then a pro and then a con? Or should we do all the pros and then all the cons? I think we go pro, con, pro, con, pro, con. Balance it out. Okay, here we go. First pro is the beaches. The beaches in New Zealand, generally, are beautiful, empty, and clean. On a summer's day in the UK, if you go to the beach, it is absolutely rammed with people because we don't have that many beaches and we don't get that many sunny beach days where it's actually hot enough to wear a bikini. So the moment that weather comes around, we're all dying to race down the beach and make the most of it. Whereas in New Zealand, it's a little bit more chilled and there just isn't a population here anywhere near the size of the UK one. So there's so many less people and there are loads and loads and loads of beaches to choose from and they're all beautiful. So I feel like there's less people spread across more places. So that is a massive pro of living in New Zealand, especially through the summertime. Okay, we are now moving on to the first con. This is the biggest con for me, I think. Like the thing I feel like I'm lacking sometimes is culture and like buzz, like atmosphere, culture, buzz. And bear with me on that. I don't want to offend anyone, but I look around everywhere and I'm like, oh, just imagine this place, but actually Maori, like full of the Maori culture, the Maori people, the Maori way of life. Like it would just be so much more interesting, and it's just quite painful to me that that culture has been so kind of repressed and hidden. And don't get me wrong, like I think New Zealand are trying to bring it back and trying to embrace it more, like the Maori language is used all over the place. It's just not there yet. It's really not there yet. And what is here is lacking in that history and that depth. And I think what doesn't help with the lack of culture and buzz is a lot of, like, all the shops. I finish work at 6 o'clock and all the shops are closed. Like everything's closed on the main road in the main city. On the main road, I walk down the main road in the city, everyone's just finished work, it's a Friday night, all the shops are shut. It's like a little bit dead. There's no kind of atmosphere and bars. And there are bars and things open, but like, for example, there are a lot of pubs that will like close at 8 or 9, unless it's a weekend, which, yeah, I think it's just a little bit, brings the tone down, you know? Okay, the second pro I have, and this is a massive pro of New Zealand, is the access to nature. I live in the middle of Auckland. Auckland is like the main, it's not the capital, but it's like the main city of New Zealand. It's the one everyone knows about in the rest of the world. It's where most of like the big business is. And I can drive 10 minutes and be on the most beautiful walk in the countryside with incredible views. I can drive half an hour and there's a waterfall and all sorts of other beautiful things. I can walk down the road into glorious green spaces. The access to nature, and it feels untouched and looked after and clean, and it's just absolutely stunning. So I would say that access to nature here is absolutely fantastic. Great for mental health. Moving on to the next con. I feel like I'm not spending that much time talking about the pros and I'm going on and on about the cons, but it's because I'm trying to explain myself, so I don't want to offend anyone, and also I want to like justify what I'm saying with the cons. I feel a bit nervous. Right, the next con, it's a really simple one. It's very expensive here, particularly food. Food in the supermarket is absolutely wildly expensive. I think it's to do with a lot of the food here being imported, although to be fair, a lot of the fresh produce that is from New Zealand is also really expensive, so I'm not sure that's the reason why. But it's really bloody expensive. I know the cost of living has gone up in most countries at the moment. I know it's definitely gone up in the UK, but it just, I'm telling you now, it does not compare. It is so expensive here. Our weekly shop and things is just mental. Okay, pro number 3 is the South Island. The South Island is just something else. The landscapes are just incredible. There's like mountains one minute and a massive lake and a waterfall and a river and just stunning, magnificent natural beauty. And it's also super untouched because there really is not a lot of people living in the South Island. The population of New Zealand in general is really small, but in the South Island is even smaller. It's mainly like, it seemed to be mainly farmland and then like a few people living in like the towns and things, maybe a few more in Queenstown, but it relies a lot on tourism. But just the fact that the South Island is so easy to access, that you can get the ferry there or you can fly down there and it's fairly affordable, and you can travel around there and it is just stunning. Honestly, it's beautiful. So I would say, yeah, access to the South Island of New Zealand, amazing. Okay, moving on to the next con. We are going for, so I really feel like I shout when I do these videos. I need to stop talking so loud. The next con is that New Zealand is really far away from everywhere. Obviously, living in the UK, I am blessed with being so close to Europe. France is like an hour away on a plane. You can even get the train to France. Like that, now I live here, seems pretty mental. The closest country to New Zealand is obviously Australia, and that's a 3-hour flight away, and that's to the closest part of Australia. Obviously Australia is a big place, you could go all the way to the other side. And then if you're not going to Australia, the next closest place is probably at least a 5 or 6 hour plane ride away. So, plane ride, is that a thing? Do we ride on a plane? Flight away, 5-hour flight. And obviously the flights are more expensive because they're longer distances. So that is a bit of a pain. Obviously for me, I'm only here for a certain amount of time and I'm quite happy to stay in New Zealand. That is the reason I'm here, is to explore New Zealand. But I do feel if you were Kiwi and living here, that would be a little bit limiting and a little bit isolating. We're so lucky in the UK to be able to be like, should we go on a quick weekend trip to Paris? Or should we go on a quick weekend trip to Barcelona? Couple of hours on a flight, really cheap tickets, easy, bish bash bosh. Here, not really possible. Okay. Pro number 4 is, despite, I know I've said already that one of the cons with it, it's really expensive here, but there is one thing that seems to be cheaper and that is eating out at restaurants. Really weirdly, the food in the supermarket is really expensive, but if you actually just want to go out for dinner at a restaurant, you're paying probably less than you are in the UK. Like, it is pretty good prices for most stuff, and the food is really good. Everyone talks about the really good Asian food culture in Australia. No one mentions it here, and I would say it's pretty darn good. There is a big Asian population here, and the restaurants and food reflect that for sure. There's great Korean food, Japanese food, Chinese food, Thai food. Excelente. It's really delicious, and it's a really good price. Like, you can quite easily find food out for like 12 quid for a main, which I think is quite good for really good food. Okay, the next con, unfortunately I do have another one. The next con is, and to me this is a con, to some other people this might be a pro, so do take everything I'm saying with like a pinch of salt. New Zealand feels a little bit behind the UK, for example, like maybe 5 to 10 years behind in a lot of ways. Everything just feels a little bit dated. Like, we don't have the same convenience that we have in the UK now. Like, Amazon, for example, is a massive one. Amazon next day delivery, and you can get next day delivery on most online orders now in the UK. In New Zealand, if you order online, you're looking at a minimum of 5 days and a maximum of like 3 weeks for it to turn up. I think a lot of that is to do with a lot of the stuff being imported here. I don't think Amazon has an actual base in New Zealand, so probably most of the stuff is flown in from somewhere else. The look of the buildings, like, nothing feels like super edgy and modern. There's kind of just a lot of stuff that was maybe built like 20 years ago, and then it's kind of stopped. There's no real like funky edginess or like new modern. I'd say a big thing at the moment is like independent like cafes and restaurants that are really funky and cool and different and interesting, and there isn't that here. Like, well, there is, but there's only a tiny bit of it, and it's not like easily accessible, and it's not everywhere for sure. So yeah, it just feels a little bit behind in terms of like keeping up with modern culture. I don't know. Okay, I have got one more pro for you, and this is a really, really lovely one. I love this about New Zealand. It is that the Kiwi people are generally really, really friendly. Yesterday, for example, we went on a lovely walk. Every time we passed someone, they said hello, which is just lovely. And I do feel like you get that in the UK, in the countryside, but we're in Auckland, like, we're in the city. We were like slightly, you know, we were on a walk, so it feels like the countryside, but we're in the city, and everyone's friendly and everyone says hello. And that is just really nice. I would say there's definitely a very friendly culture here, which is really lovely. And I suppose I'll have to finish on a con. I've got one more con for you, and it's a really sad con, and it's quite an intense point to finish on, to be honest. But I feel like it's really important to talk about it and mention it, because it's not something I was really at all aware of before I came here, and I don't think that the general population of the world, or certainly the UK, thinks about this, and it's not really talked about. But on the streets, when I walk down the main road in Auckland that leads to the main business district with all the shops on it, when I walk down that road to and from work, there are a lot of homeless people on it, or certainly they appear homeless, or they are begging, whatever it is. 9 out of 10 of those people, if not 10 out of 10, are Maori, which is really, really sad. I mean, there's systemic racism in most countries. There's systemic racism in the UK for sure, but it feels quite stark here, the difference. I work in quite a corporate office that manages people's wealth, and as far as I'm aware, there's not one Maori person employed. You walk into spaces, I really notice it when we go to the cinema, that a lot of the workers there tend to be Maori. which is a lower paid job than like an office job in the central of the business district where there's a real lack of Maori representation. So I would say, I think, sorry to end on such an intense con, but I think that for me is probably the saddest thing about living here. But having said that, as I already mentioned, I do think New Zealand are really trying to change that, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I do think that's probably one of New Zealand's like worst points. Okay, I hope I haven't offended too many people. Please understand this is only my opinions. If you have a different opinion, feel free to pop it in the comments as long as you're being kind. If you're thinking about moving to New Zealand and trying to make up your mind, I hope some of those pros and cons have helped you decide one way or the other, or just given you more of an insight into life here. Thank you very much for coming to watch today. That is not an exhaustive list of all of the pros and cons, but I hope it's given you a little taster. If you're watching this and you're from New Zealand, you live in New Zealand, you used to live in New Zealand, please, please, please pop your pros in the comments below. I would love to see all the things that you think are the best about New Zealand. I would love to know, so pop them in the comments below. And especially if you have a restaurant recommendation or a place to go recommendation, like where I should visit, please pop a comment down below, because the best advice is always from the locals. And that is all. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Please, please, please. I will see you next week with another video, and goodbye. Goodbye.